Hello everyone, and welcome to Blue Tengu's live game development show, where we show everything that goes into making a game from concept to completion. If you've ever wanted to make a game, we hope this will help lower the barrier to entry, maybe give you the nudge needed to try it yourself. Even if you don't want to make a game, we hope you'll find some value in what we're doing here. Might take a little time for my coffee to kick in because I started a little late this morning. I had to fix a few things on Twitch, so got a little bit of a delay in there, but anyway, to keep going, all of the information about where you can find us is in the Twitch info down below, or in our YouTube profile for those of you catching us later, but just in case, we're at www.bluetengu.com, btengu on Twitter, facebook.com Bluetengu Studio, youtube.com Bluetengu Studio for those of you watching the live stream now, and Twitch TV Bluetengu for those of you catching us later on YouTube. If you missed any of the episodes, you can always catch them over at YouTube, but you shouldn't have any trouble following along even if you haven't seen them. For those of you who haven't seen the show on Twitch or YouTube before, my name's Eric. I'm a game designer living in Japan who's trying to show you everything that goes into making a game for about 2 hours a week, including all the ums and ahs and awkward debugging moments. And just a warning in advance, today I do have to take care of something, so I probably will do my best anyway, because I always tend to go over, but do my best to try and stop at 10 on the dot. Just advance warning. Hopefully I can get the task done today in time. Anyway, the reason I'm showing everything as opposed to making the game first and scripting out a rehearsed tutorial like a lot of people do is because I do want to help lower that barrier you feel in making a game. And I think if you see someone, stumbling through it, you'll figure that you can do it yourself as well. If you are working on something, feel free to drop a link in the feed. Thank you to everyone who dropped by last week, and thank you PandaBits for dropping by right away. For those of you here with me on Twitch, feel free to drop suggestions or ask me questions at any time. May not be able to answer them right away because I am working, but I'll try to get to them, usually when I'm in between thinking, which happens quite a bit. That's when I try to catch up to the chat. But if for some reason I can't respond to your chat message, send it again, for example, if it just seems like I skipped it over, or send me a private message here, leave a comment on our site or YouTube video, and I'll do my best to address it next time. If any of you are out there making something and you don't mind showing it off, like I said, send me a link to your stuff. I'd love to see it. You can post it in the feed. I'd leave, hyperlinks on. Hopefully people don't spam it someday, but I think we'll be fine. And at this time, every week for 2 hours, I come on to Twitch TV to work on the game Project Spaghetti for this season, which is a top-down 2D cowboy shooter where the bullets fired bounce around the screen with a pinball mechanic. Last week, I took the decision of whether to shoot at the cowboy or not, away from individual enemies, and put that decision-making process into the hands of a central enemy manager, mainly to give me better control over the game experience and to help avoid random chance leading to situations where too many bullets are coming at the player at once, especially the case with the aliens because their attack takes some time, so if their attacks start piling up on each other, then it just becomes impossible to dodge, so I needed to have a better control over that. And this week, like I mentioned last week, my goal is to implement controller support. And I did have basically surgery at the beginning of the week and have been kind of out of it since then. So I haven't had any time to prepare anything. Right now, I should be okay. I'm not dying or anything, but my preparation for this episode is a little skimpy. So we'll see if I can pick up how to implement controller support or not. I can't imagine GameMaker Studio, which is what I use to make the game, is going to make it that difficult to implement controller support, but haven't tested anything, so we'll find out. So you can find out with me. Let's jump over to the desktop first and get the broadcast software out of the way, and jump on over to Trello, where I keep my task list. If you search Trello Project Spaghetti, it'll pop up, but I always post a link in the YouTube video for those of you who are interested. It's at the very bottom of the Twitch feed as well. And episode 28, really simple, one task, since I have no idea how long it's going to take. And I do want to end the episode right at 10, so I do have a 1.5 task in here. But because it's completely new, it could be much more than 1.5. So this episode is just adding controller support. But first thing, I guess, is to show where I am right now. So jump over and do that. So I do use GameMaker Studio, as I mentioned in a lot of other episodes as well. There's a couple of reasons for it. The main one is that I think it's just the right amount of complexity that I need for this project. I do know how to use Unity and Unreal Engine and things like that, but that kind of stuff would be overkill for what I'm trying to do. And usually the simplest tool you can get to do something is the best way to go about it, because otherwise you have to start worrying about other things that are unrelated to what you're doing. If all you need to do is write text, for example, then WordPad might be plenty for you, and you don't need Word and all its features, things like that. It's the same principle, and that's why I use GameMaker Studio. There are definitely professional games out there. The original Spelunky was made in GameMaker Studio, and let's see, I'm trying to remember, Gunpoint, an awesome game made in GameMaker Studio. So there are examples of that, but let's jump right in. And I'm just noticing in the background here, I did read this article, but someone created a Commodore 64 emulator in GameMaker, which is awesome. Good on them. As you'll notice with the color scheme, it's all rather simple, and what it is it is following the Commodore 64 color pattern. So I'm always happy when I see Commodore 64 stuff make its way into the world, especially GameMaker Studio. So let's get started. So the basic game premise is just you fire bullets, they bounce around. The more the bullets bounce, the faster they get. As you can see, that one turned blue, got a little faster. If it hits the enemy in that fast state, it's worth more points. Like there, it was worth 3 times 100 as opposed to just the usual, like 1 times 100. And as it starts to get a little chaotic, you have to keep ducking. Ducking also speeds up the bullets too. And there are other levels with different types of enemies that kind of test the mechanic in different ways. This is the graveyard level. If you try to shoot the ghosts, bullets go through them, so you have to ring the bell, which gets the ghost angry at you, and it brings down a flurry of bats, so you have to be kind of careful about how you use the bell when you use it. Third level is the desert level. Difference is that there's these cactus bumpers which fire out spines, but you have to use those because you've got these scorpion enemies that face you. They'll block your attacks, get upset, and charge you. So you'll never be able to really just shoot them face on. You have to kind of set up situations where bullets are hitting them from behind. And part of what's going to work for that is using the cacti. This is that alien level I was talking about. The aliens start to fire out these lasers. When too many lasers come out at the same time, obviously things go nuts. I haven't updated the AI manager to work with aliens quite yet, so they're still based on random chance at the moment. And I'll skip ahead. This is the Christmas level. Like the cacti, the tree fires out ornamental shards as bullets. And the enemy, the more you shoot it, the faster it gets. If it has a head, it charges after you. If it doesn't have a head, then it just wanders around randomly. And last is the boss. Still working on this one, but there's basically a giant boss enemy that has different attack patterns. But I don't want to spend too much time going over the game. That's basically it. One thing I do want to do, I think, so you guys can see it, is make sure I move the GameMaker window up here, because I know I've mentioned it in the past, but I have a really old monitor, which is just a square monitor as opposed to a 16:9 resolution monitor. So to get 16:9 resolution kicking, I have to use basically the upper half of the monitor. So that means there's this dead zone down here, and if I start doing stuff in the dead zone, you won't be able to see it. So I just have to remind myself to work at the top. And PandaBits mentions really hadn't known Spelunky was made in GameMaker. Yeah, it's actually really interesting because GameMaker, Spelunky's developer Derek Yu released, I think, all of the original source for Spelunky, but let me see that source. Oops, not Spelunky. There we go. Yeah, I even went to it one day and it still remembers. But if you go to www.spelunkyworld.com original HTML, you can actually, I think, pick up the entire source for Spelunky in GameMaker. Unfortunately, I did try it in GameMaker Studio. It doesn't work as is in GameMaker Studio because a lot of things changed from, I don't know what version this was made in, like GameMaker 8 or 7 or something like that, if there was a 7. But it was made quite a while ago, obviously, because it was remade in something else. But yeah, well, it describes it right here. This is the original freeware version of Spelunky that was released in 2009. It's still free, and then the HD reboot is what everyone knows and loves now, and that's what's on Steam and everything else. But he has the source and everything else on the site, so it's an interesting look. Even if it doesn't work, if you do have GameMaker Studio, it won't work as is because some of those functions that were used back then are just gone now. But yeah, you can even play the original game too. And then the other one, I guess I should mention it, because this is actually one of the things that turned me on to GameMaker. Is Tom Francis, a journalist, decided to make a game, and the game he made was Gunpoint. And because GameMaker Studio was easy, I think that's why he chose it. But this is an example of a game that was made in GameMaker, and it's awesome. It's a very fun game. Solid mechanic, everything else. But that's that. Let's try to get into controls here. First thing I'm going to have to look up is GameMaker controller support. I did look up that there is a set of commands at least, so it shouldn't be too bad. I would imagine that it works pretty much exactly like a keyboard. For example, when I accept keyboard input, where do I accept keyboard input? Actors, player? I think I accept it all in player. Yeah. Like for example, if I hit control to fire a bullet, basically I set up an event to handle control and all of that's done in here. So what I'm going to probably need to do is say either control or whatever button happens to be the fire button. I did plug in, I have like a PlayStation controller, Xbox controller, all of that, but the Xbox controller tends to work just right in Windows, so I did plug that in. So I should be able to test it right away once I get something in here. I don't know if they have the gamepad events in here. It doesn't look like it. No, so I guess you have to do all that in script. Yeah, okay. It looks like you do need to handle all that stuff in script. And let's see, compatibility. Yeah, I don't think I need to worry about Bluetooth controllers and Ouya's and stuff like that at the moment. Let's just worry about what I have plugged in right now and get that working. A lot of this stuff is going to be necessary in the future, obviously, to check whether there is a controller plugged in, to check the options, make sure that the controller is supported, all that stuff. That's the proper way to go about it. But I think for now, I just want to actually get the buttons working. Let's see. Device inputs. Asynchronous system event. There is that. I want to check. Add event, asynchronous. Okay, well, it's not in that list, so I don't think that's what they're talking about. Let's see what they do for device inputs. Probably the first thing I guess I should do is just make sure that the game notices that I'm pushing a button, that'll be the easiest way to get started, I suppose. Alright, well, let's see what happens. Let's see. Let's start with the X button. That would be GP phase 3. I should probably have my browser up here too, so you guys can see what I'm browsing in the future. That's about right. Okay. So I don't think it's going to work with any key. Built-in constants. Yeah, I don't think it's going to work with key. Similar to the device inputs. Get button pressed. Okay. Let's do this. Gamepad button check. Alright. Let's just add script. So I guess I have to do that in step. It looks like. So let's just add in a simple if device. Guess I need to store the device somewhere. It's connected. Returns Boolean. Yeah, the information here is a little scarce, isn't it? Which gamepad device slot to check? Okay, they at least have an example down here. I'll start with 0. I mean, it's plugged into a USB port, so who knows what that means, but we'll try 0. If it doesn't work, it won't work. And GP phase 3. So that should return true if it's being pressed. I guess if it's being pressed, I could, what could I do? Draw something, I suppose. Draw an ellipse. Let's make it relatively big. Be a shame if I'm misunderstanding how an ellipse is drawn on the screen, but should probably add a show debug message in there as well. And let me catch up to the chat. Spanabits mentions set an alarm for when there is an input and then mash it. Also, wouldn't there need to be a check early on whether or not there is a gamepad? Yeah, like I mentioned, in the future, to do proper gamepad support, gonna have to use all these things down here, like, is there a gamepad connected? Is it supported? If so, then turn, a gamepad flag on and do that check every time, to make sure that it hasn't been unplugged in the meantime. So probably have to do that every step, for example, and then after that start checking buttons, everything else. Whether, I think in this game it doesn't matter if people use the gamepad and the keyboard at the same time. If they want to do that, then go ahead. So I don't think I have to be too severe in like the connected checks, but who knows if GameMaker throws me an error. For example, if I have something that's trying to get a button from a device that's not connected. If it does, then yeah, I definitely have to do this stuff carefully. But for now, I'm just going to try to check to see if it recognizes a button's being pressed. At least there it didn't look like it. Let's check. Step. Instead of draw ellipse, let's do something. Show debug message. But pressed. Okay. So who knows if this is plugged into device 0 or what. There must be some way to detect which port this thing is connected into, you would think. Gamepad is supported. That's just for platforms. Get device count. This seems like a good place to start. Gamepad is connected. I guess I could do this as well. Let's do that in system. It'll at least tell me if gamepads are connected to those different ports, so that's probably a good place to start as well. So maybe in the create, let's get a script going in there. In fact, let's just go ahead and do what they had. Get device count. Get started with that. It's probably the best way to go. Yeah, I'll even use the variable names, I guess. System. Now let's just go sys gpnum. So that should give me the total number of gamepads connected. Go through the numbers. It's really weird to see that semicolon there, but okay. And then if it's connected, set the global variable to true. Rather than do that, let's do this. Well, I guess I have to string I is connected to give me that message. And this should happen when the system starts up, if all goes well. Let's see if it said anything down here. Didn't say anything down here, so that's a bad sign. Ah, button pressed. Okay. So it is plugged into port 0, even if it's not doing the gamepad stuff. So that's a good start. At least it is recognizing the controller and reacting to the controller, so that gives me the springboard I need, I guess, to get going. Not sure why those messages about the controller being plugged in did not show up, though. That's a little disturbing. Maybe it came earlier? No. And I guess it's not important, but it does kind of bug me. Gamepads detected. Let's just go with a simple message. String sys gpnum. Maybe create's not the best place for this, I don't know, but let's see. I think we're off to a good start. I think as long as it's detecting something coming out of the controller, I have something to work with. Let's pause. Yeah, that's never pumping anything into the debug stuff. No, there we go. It's just hidden at the very, very beginning. I guess because system does come pretty early. Okay, so hidden away in the debug messages here, it says gamepads detected 4. I don't have 4 gamepads connected to my computer, so I guess that's probably more of a potential gamepads connected thing. And then it looped through each one of those and figured out that device 0 which is the one I happen to be using, is connected. So it worked out. My guess of 0, I mean, I guess because I don't have other gamepads connected, so GameMaker knows what to do with that, and it just assumes the first gamepad connected is the 0 gamepad. So that is working. The detection stuff is working, and pushing a button is being detected. So we're off to a good start. Now it's time to, I guess, get the shooting and the ducking on buttons just to see how this stuff works in game. One thing I do notice is, which one am I using? Let's go for the player. Player step. It's unfortunate that I have to add all this into step, because it just crowds that up quite a bit, but button push, yeah, that's fine. Gamepad button check. Okay, so I'm using gamepad button check. And I need to make sure that whatever I'm doing with the buttons is the same thing I'm doing with the keyboard, which is what I'm looking at right now. Looks like I'm just using control instead of key press, so I should be okay with just using what I have now, because there's two paintbrush. There's two possibilities. In GameMaker, you can detect if I can draw a button in paintbrush. This should test my skills. So, assuming this is a button, if you use your imagination, there's two ways to go about detecting it. You can either detect whether it's being pressed, which is what I'm doing now with the keys and the button, or you can. So what this will do is it'll keep returning true over and over again while that's being held down. So just true, 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 true until it's released. If you use key pressed or gamepad button check pressed, it'll only get one true out of this. It'll only trigger true when this thing is first pressed down. So it just really depends on the kind of game you're making, whether you want to do it that way or the other way. In our case, since all of the how often you can fire and stuff is being handled script side, I just use this. That's enough for what I need. So same with the button pushes. I'll just go with what I have now. Ah, man, is there a way to clean this up? I guess I could just make one script that does it all, because I don't want to have a bunch of ifs and elses in here. It's going to get kind of messy. So let's bring that out of there. And I remember what this is doing. Okay, so controller support. Not sure why I did that. Okay. So obviously in the future I'm going to want to let players pick whatever buttons they want to do whatever they want with them, but for now I'm just going to pick buttons. Looking at the Xbox controller, I would assume in my case that the X button is going to be shoot. A button, because it's down, kind of feels like a dodge, so I'll probably assign dodge to the A button for now. And that's GP face 1. Let's see, GP face 1. No, I don't need to say is true. And I guess they can dodge and shoot at the same time if they want to, at least in terms of inputs, so I don't need an else if. Okay. And Panabits mentions time for the time sandwich, creating the script, checking the script, then debugging the script. Yes, exactly. This is where it's just all about getting things done. But it doesn't seem like it's going to be too complicated. So, if you guys have questions, I'll try to follow the chat better than I did with the AI manager. Obviously, that was a little trickier, so couldn't really follow the chat too well with that. Obviously, if you have questions that are completely unrelated to controllers or anything else, feel free to ask away. So let's see. One of the problems I'm going to have is the fact that there's a lot of logic going on inside of these key presses. And I'm going to have to copy it all out, which is pretty inefficient. So this is a case against GameMaker Studios GUI-based development. It's nice if all I have to do is worry about the control key because I can put all the logic in here and it looks pretty. But at the end of the day, if I'm going to want to support like mice and keyboards and joysticks and everything else, then I'm going to need this logic in one place and have, if a button is pressed or if control is pressed or if the mouse button is pressed, do whatever's in here, and I can't do that in the UI. So at the end of the day, you start out with the UI stuff, but then you just more and more starts to flow into script until it basically becomes just a scripting thing. But it's no fault of game makers. They do what they can with what they've got. So it's just the way it works. It's unfortunate that I do have to bring all of this out. So basically I have to copy all the graphical stuff, all the stuff that's going on in the UI into script. So that's going to be kind of a hassle. So control is my fire button, so whatever's going on in here needs to be in the firing section. But at the end of the day, I needed to move it all into script anyway, because in the future I was going to allow players to assign whatever keys they wanted, so I guess it was fate that I would do it today. So let's see, fire. So the first thing is to check this stuff. And then if that's true, then I check that. And I can make that more efficient by combining them, but I won't worry about it for now. I'll just copy it as it is. PL charging is true. And set alarm 4 to that. Alarm 4. Alarm 4? Okay, I think that's how I do it. Set it to that. This else. Okay, that just handles the charging, so that goes here. Yeah, I think that else goes on the outside. Yeah. So set alarm 4 to -1. PL charging set to false. The whole charging thing is if you hold down the control button, it starts to slowly charge the bullet. Obviously, if you're not in a state where you can shoot, then that needs to be canceled, which is why this else is paired outside of this as opposed to inside of this. PL charge level to 0. Make sure I get the names right. 0. And that looks to be everything that was in the control. And let's catch up. B and A are very commonly used for those inputs. So on the Xbox controller, B and A. Yeah, shooting and ducking. I guess it kind of depends. I guess if you're in a first-person shooter, it's usually the triggers, but for an action game, I guess just because of where your fingers are going to naturally be. Sorry, my controller's kind of grody, by the way. It just gets that way. Um, just because of the way the hand naturally rests, the easiest buttons to push on the Xbox controller, if you just lay your hand on it, you can kind of tell what they are. Left trigger, left stick, and either right stick or the X and A combination. So whatever you do most in your game probably should be on those controls. A couple of things I guess you need to keep in mind. For this game, there aren't that many controls. It's not like there's a camera look or anything else, but um, one thing you do need to keep in mind, for example, in an FPS, and you can use it to your advantage as well. If you do have like the right stick for controlling aiming or camera stuff, the right stick works fine with the triggers because your fingers can all be in the right place. But if you have your finger on the right stick, you can't push these buttons at the same time. I mean, I guess you could try to do something like this, but usually you want to assign something to the buttons that you can stop aiming for. Which is why a lot of like FPSs use like jump and things like that. I guess you don't really need to aim while you jump, for example. And also like modes and turning on shields and functions and things like that. And a lot of games use it to actually good effect because they actually penalize you for that. Like, for example, if you do want to turn on your shields or something with like the Y button, that action requires you to stop aiming to do that, which is kind of like a small punishment for doing that, as well as kind of a little bit of a delay. So, the people that are thinking about controllers and FPSs are obviously, they've got a lot of history and then everything else to work with. It's definitely a science. But in general, you just want to kind of follow the way the hand works. Same thing with the D-pad. Usually, the left stick is usually assigned to movement, so that's a very important stick. If you want to take your finger off of that stick to work with the D-pad, whatever's going on in the D-pad needs to be pretty unimportant to gameplay in general. Usually it's like switching a view or switching modes or maybe changing your equipment or something like that. Same with like the left bumper, right bumper. If your fingers are here, they're not on the triggers. And your thumb is only going to be usually on one of these buttons at the same time. If it's going to be on two at once, it's going to be X and A, Y and B. So just think about hands, I guess, when you're implementing controls. This game doesn't matter that much because... Oh, crap, the controller's perfectly out of frame. Sorry. Yeah, I guess the camera is left. Sorry. That was a long description for something that's off camera. But let me go through that really quick. Just remember that when you're dealing with controllers, where the player's fingers are, they're only going to be in one place at a time, so just set it up so that, if you're using the left stick, it's not something that you have to do at the same time as the D-pad, or if you're using the right stick, make sure it's something you don't have to do at the same time as these buttons. Make sure that you don't use the bumpers and the triggers at the same time for anything important. So that's the lesson in frame. Thank you, Pandabit. Sorry about that. That was a nice long description of something that was completely out of frame. But let's see. So I've got all the functionality from Control over in there. And what I could do is, I think there's a key pressed function. So I don't even have to have that visual thing anymore. Well, let's just go here, keyboard input. Keyboard check. Okay, if keyboard check VK control, left control, VK check, L control. VK. Let's copy it as is. And the reason I want to move it out of that UI and into here is because I don't want to have a case in the future where I figure out something's wrong with this and fix it in here and forget to fix it for the controller. So for now, what I'm going to do is just make sure it never controls and comes into here. If true is false. Hopefully GameMaker knows what to do with that. And just make sure it doesn't come into here so that I know the script is working. So that should be doing the same thing I was doing out there. Let's get everything lined up properly. So otherwise I'll forget to do this. And let's see what happens. Let's make sure I can shoot with the button. Interesting. Very interesting. That was odd. It took the controller button input, but it just continued to charge the thing. I guess I should make sure that the control is still working, just to make sure there isn't a problem with the script logic. There's definitely something wrong with the charging. Okay, so there's something wrong with the charging. Now, I do have release control stuff. Okay. This is why. So I need to copy all of this out too. This is for what happens when the player releases the control key. So unfortunately I need all this logic in there too. First thing. Let's see, keyboard check. Pressed. Check released. Check released. VKL control. And in the future I don't want to use VKL control. I'll probably want to use a variable so that I can change the keys later more easily. But for now let's do it this way. So copying out that logic. Release control. Bullets is greater than 0. If all of that is true, set PL shoot to 1. You know what? Let's see if I can do it this way. Let me take a screenshot if I can. It's not going to help me because I need to click on these things to see what the ifs are. Alright, I guess it's just going to be one by one. Sorry about this. Just the way it has to be done. I'll try to go fast. And I'll try to go one by one to make sure I don't make mistakes here. And I'll improve efficiency and all that later. Listen, single equal signs freak me out. Let's do that. Decide the bullet direction, so PL shoot to 1, alarm 0 to 15. PL shoot 1, alarm 0 to 15. If you notice me making a mistake, definitely call me out on it. PL shoot is 1, alarm 0 is 15 frames. And don't you need to change it from a keyboard check to the gamepad check? Because if your code check is for control isn't pressed, it won't apply to that button on the pad. Yeah, that's going to be the next step. I just want to move the stuff into out of this release control into there, and then I'll add that gamepad. Where is it? Get check released. But since you mentioned that, I think it's worth not forgetting it. So let's do it. Let's do it. Let's do it. Button check released. Okay, that way I do the controller and the keyboard at the same time. Don't have to worry about forgetting it that way. Thank you. Execute SCR fire shot with peel direction. Okay. And come on down to here next. If the shot was good, so if clear shot is true. One of the other hassles of working with a user interface is to constantly have to move the windows around. If that's true, then do the firing stuff. So now we're down here. I guess that is all script, so just have to copy that one as is. That's going to be messy. Let's make sure we leave plenty of room so I don't screw things up in the bracket department. So I guess, you know, the lesson to learn is to not do too much in the GameMaker UI because you'll eventually have to do it all in script anyway. But I guess it's a good way to get used to the way it works. So I definitely don't regret doing it that way. Plus I think it's easier for you guys to follow if it's in the UI as opposed to just scripting. Make sure these brackets are matching up. That is the end of the else. And there's a whole bunch of brackets down here. Hopefully they line up to something. That's the switch, that's the else. I think there's more stuff after the else, so I should probably leave that open. Next is another check. If the charge level is 5, this is where I knock the player down if they send out an explosive bullet. So more nested brackets. Keep them coming. Set the player hurt state to 1. So I'll just try to remember that. Alarm 3 sets to that. PL hurts 1. PL hurt is 1. And alarm 3 is this. Okay, can I keep this up at the same time? That at least helped me a little bit. Knockback, show stars. I should probably copy these comments too. Okay, that's that. Play sound effect with these two parameters. SCR play sound effect. SCR play sound effects with that, and global effects hit count. Yep. And that ends that knockback if. The next thing is going to be this. So that handles that. Pale bullets minus equals 1. And then an else for the sound effect for when they can't fire. Which compares with that. Sound effects dud. Well, sound effects dud count. And I should probably make sure I get my brackets straight. So let's do that first. And what else? And just at the very end, do this stuff. So alarm 4 is equal to 1. Alarm 4, almost done. Alarm 4, PL charging is false. Okay. I think that'll do it. Okay, let's make sure that this code isn't being run in the background, so let's do another one of those if true equals false things. Just to keep this for reference. And let's see what happens. Lovely. Something bad, my favorite, unexpected symbol 93. Which is probably not going to be what I want. I'm sure it's a bracket missing somewhere. Stretch this out a bit. That's that. Clear shot's true, then that's that. That's for the else. That's for the dodge. That's for the if. That's for the shoot. That's that bracket, so it might just be this thing. Yeah, that looks fine. Those brackets are paired up. Those brackets are paired up. Just in case. I think GameMaker understands what that means, but just in case. Everything looks fine, but let me comment it out just to make sure. I'll just take it level by level. Squash that bug. So whatever's going wrong is in there. Step 1. this. Okay. Take it a few layers deeper. Okay, so whatever it is in between what I commented out in the beginning or the end. 92. Narrowing it down. So it's got to be something around here. That's fine. That's fine. So it's got to be the brackets towards the end here. Oh, there's this thing there. That's no good. That might have just been the problem. Let me check. No. So there must be something going on with those brackets. Let's take it out a level. So there should only be 3 brackets at the end. Yeah, Panda Bits, you've seen that something bad error plenty of times. I'm sure you'd prefer it didn't show up as well, because it does add debugging stuff. But we'll get it. We'll get it. It's definitely going to be a bracket or parentheses problem. It's happening even at that level, so peel bullets. By the way, if you guys do notice what's wrong, feel free to shout out. I don't mind spoilers. Let's see, so that should be the last 2. Charging 4 is equal to 0. Those look okay. It's hard to imagine something's wrong with those 2 lines. Apparently something is. If PL shoot is equal to 0, why would there be something wrong with that? Let me just try commenting these out as well. Okay, that works. So something's wrong with those. Let's get to it. So let's bring everything back for now and just leave those lines commented out. Okay, last step is to pin down exactly which of those 3 lines is causing the problem. I can't imagine these 2 are causing a problem. I'd imagine it would have to be the alarm. Yep. So what am I doing wrong with the alarm? There definitely is an alarm 4, so that's not the problem. It let me get away with it up here for some reason. Oh, okay, got it. Accidentally typed a colon instead of a semicolon. Alright, it'd be nice if it said that instead of something bad. So we should be good to go now. Guess that's happened more than once, so I need to check that more often. Alright, let's see. Okay, well I'm using the keyboard to move around, but hopefully this will be in frame. Pushing the X button to shoot, and I can charge? Yep, I can also charge my bullets. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yep, and I get my knockdown when I fire my super bullet, so everything's working fine with the control button anyway. That was going to be the hard one because the control is a lot more complicated than the dodge, so hard part's out of the way. Let's move on, while we're on a roll, to getting the dodge mechanic in there. And that right now is attached to space. Is there a release space? No, there's no release space, so I think we're fine. What was backspace? Oh yeah, backspace was for debugging lasers. Okay. Whew. Nice to see the controller working in an hour. Oh, Panovitz, yeah, don't worry about it. It would be, you mentioned need to remember to call out the semicolons. I'm sure, based on the resolution of how it appears in Twitch and everything else, it'd probably be so tiny. If I don't notice it on my screen and it's right in front of my face, it's going to be tough for you guys. But yeah, if you do spot me doing a colon instead of semicolon in the future, or if you even remind me that could be a problem, yeah, I'd appreciate it. I do want to take the time to thank Pandavits, by the way, for coming by, every week and supporting the show and me and my game development process here. It's always nice to see you, and I do appreciate it a lot. It's nice to have someone out there who's interested in what you're doing, and I do appreciate it a lot. And for the rest of you guys who are in the chat too, feel free to jump in anytime. I don't check names or anything else, so if you want to lurk and just kind of watch it in the background, don't mind at all. But if you are interested, say hello. That's cool. I won't bite, and I can't because the internet's in between us anyway. So the next thing is going to be moving all the space stuff to a key. So let's just do it. Get it done. So same thing as before. That's all going to be the A button, which is face 1. So first thing is checking if this. And I need to bring that key down here too. Guess I don't need to overdo it with the parentheses. Now I'm getting paranoid, so I want to cut down on my parentheses. Let's keep it going. Space. PL super shot. Set to false. Equals true. And I'll copy the comments too. Set alarm 5 to whatever this is. And make sure not to do a colon. Semicolon. Okay, good. Play a sound effect. SFX play. Count. Okay, so play the dodge sound effect. Set dodge to true, so make the player, in the dodge state. Reset the cooldown so they can't keep dodging. And set alarm 1 to wait. Okay, that's all for that if. Now is the else stuff. Allow the player to shortcut the hurt animation. So if they're hurt and not dead, and allow them to get up faster. Basically do this. Okay, that's already script, so that's good. And that should do it. There's not a whole lot going on for the dodge, so that should be enough. Let me comment this out again. So if true equals false, which is impossible, at least in this universe. And let's make sure the A button on the controller works. And let me catch up to the chat because someone did jump in here. And Sirius654, welcome to the chat. Nice to hear from you. You have a habit of making the mistake of the colons. Yeah, I do it all the time. I never used to do it. Like when I was doing like C and C++ programming back in college and everything else, I never used to make that mistake. So it could just be the keyboard. It's kind of hard for you guys. I can't bring the keyboard up because it's attached, but because I'm living in Japan, I have a Japanese keyboard, and just because they have to squeeze all this extra stuff in, the keys just tend to be more scrunched together. Like there are no fat like spacebar keys or anything else, so I think it's just easier to kind of jump to the wrong key, especially around like the semicolon and colon. So it could just be a problem with the Japanese keyboard that causes that to happen a lot with me. That's been the exact problem that caused me to debug something a couple of episodes ago, the colon instead of the semicolon. But it's nice to hear someone else has the same problem. I'm not alone. And thanks for letting me watch. I do like game creation. Making a game. Sirius654 is also making a game and is always interested. Yeah, definitely. I don't know how far along in your game you are, but if you do have, running code, or if you do have a site about it, feel free to post the link in the chat. Definitely don't mind. If anyone else wants to check it out, or, I'll go and check it out, of course. And PandaBits, thank you for covering me on the times. Yeah, the schedule's down in there. And Sirius654, thank you for subscribing. Definitely appreciate it. It means a lot to me to have you guys subscribe and like videos and stuff, because I am kind of marooned over here in Japan, and I don't have that much contact with you guys over in the States and stuff. So subscriptions, likes, and things like that are definitely how I get kind of my feedback on this is worth doing. For example, PandaBit's always dropping by every week. Definitely makes it feel like, okay, this is worth doing. And I hope this helps you guys kind of want to go and make your own games. And Sirius654, newbie-ish to C++, I wouldn't be able to spot much. And you're learning as you go with your own game. Yeah, C++ takes a little time. GameMaker script isn't quite C++. It's kind of a weird combination. Like if you've ever, I don't know if you've ever done it or not, unless you work in an office environment, there's probably not a whole lot of reason to work with like Visual Basic. But it's kind of a cross between C++ and that. It is a scripting language as opposed to an actual programming language because it's all interpreted, but as far as I know, it could be compiled. I don't know. It's just called GameMaker language, so it's kind of a hybrid of that. It's easy to get used to just over time, but if you do have questions about C++, I'm a little rusty on it, so if it's about pointers and things like that, I'm going to be out of it. But if you do have any questions, feel free to send me a message. Our site's over at www.bluetengu.com. You can send me a message at just eric@bluetengu.com. If I can answer it, I'll answer it. If I can't, then I'll just throw my hands up and say sorry. But, I'm happy to help you guys out. And PandaBits mentions, don't know anything about programming, no modding of AI and stuff like that, so probably like Unreal Engine scripts and things like that. So you can figure out some things, but straight code just makes me shrug. It's Greek. It's definitely one of those applied skills, I guess. Getting used to programming, it is kind of like learning a foreign language, because until you get used to the way programming languages work, everything you have to kind of look up every single time. I do have to do that a lot with GameMaker because I'm still not quite used to it, but until you start to get used to it, it takes a long time to get anything done. But like with foreign languages, if you can get used to using it like every day or at least on a weekly basis, then it does get faster. It gets better. But, you know, Sierra 654, thank you for watching, and Pandavits, thank you for covering me in the chat and for always stopping by. Let's jump in and make sure that that dodge is moving. If I did everything right, I can get my controller in the right frame here. If I did everything right, the A button will allow the player to duck. So I guess I'll just keep that in front of my face and just... Awesome. So the only problem right now is that the space bar isn't working, but that's probably because I didn't actually change that key. So good thing I checked that. I probably still have VK control. Yeah, okay, that's my problem. So let's grab the space bar. VK space. And let's jump back in and make sure that it's business as usual for the keyboard. When adding a new feature, I guess it's always a good idea to make sure that the old stuff still works, because I definitely have a habit of breaking it. Okay, so you can't see what I'm doing, but I am hitting the space bar and he is ducking. So we're good to go. I've got the A button ducking. I got the X button shooting. Good. Buttons are working. Next step is going to be direction, getting the player to move with the stick. But before I do that, I am going to take a quick break. And before I do that, Pandavits mentioned right on the nose, Unreal Engine is what I've been changed mostly, and that's how I knew so much last episode about AI management, lots of AI checks. Yeah. Unreal Engine is absolutely fantastic for getting into game development, because it's nice to have, you know, for me too, I guess in a way, it's hard for me to go from like 0 to 1, but once I get to 1, it's easy to get from 1 to 99, and then again, it's hard to get from 99 to 100, but once I get into a flow, or once I start to kind of get it, then from there I start to speed up, but it's always that initial step that's the hardest thing. Like if you just have like a C++ empty window and it's like, all right, go to it, until you're used to that, it takes a long time to get used to how to make something out of that. But the good thing about like Unreal and having scripts and stuff like that is that when you start, you have something that works, and it allows you to experiment. You can change just a few things, see how it works, and as you change things, you know, you start to get used to it, and then once you build up that kind of that feeling for how things work, then you can start to do things from scratch. So, you know, over the past, shoot, how many years has it been since Unreal came out? Well, there's been Quake modding and stuff before that, and Doom WADs and all that way back there. So, you know, thanks to those kind of games that allow people to modify their content, good on those game developers, by the way, for allowing gamers to do that. There's been a whole generation of people who started out in game development by doing that. And a lot of times, you know, if you're looking for a job with a game company and you're just starting out, having levels that you've built in Unreal Engine and things like that can kind of prove that you have a sense for how things work, and it's how a lot of people get started. So it's actually a really good approach to take. And Pandavits, thank you for your help on the AI stuff. I'm glad you're working in Unreal Engine AI stuff, because that helped a lot. And Sierra 654 mentions thanks for the help. Appreciate it. Yeah, if you send me a message whenever you want. Been jumping around to drawing, story writing, and UI lately. Been drawing inventory and object placement, and thank you for the inspiration. I'm glad I can inspire you. That's exactly why I'm doing this show. Thank you. So drop by every time I do this every week. And definitely, once you get something going, show me your stuff. If you're on Twitter, you know, be happy if you subscribe or follow, sorry. If you follow Tengu, and I'll follow you back and definitely keep track of, you know, what you're doing if you're working on stuff. That goes for the rest of you guys too. But before I get into moving the character with the left stick on the controller, I'm going to take a quick break because my voice is dying on me, because I'm very chatty. But I will take a quick break. I hope To warn you guys, I always show something extremely weird while I'm taking that break. It usually lasts about 7 minutes, but have patience, I will be back when it's over. And if you're watching this later on YouTube, that's the thing that happens at the beginning of the episode. Probably the weirdness that you might skip, for example. But I will be right back. Thank you for waiting while I took that break. I guess Sirius 654 is in connection limbo with the stream. I hope closing the browser and reopening it did help. I guess Twitch does have its ups and downs. They definitely probably, my idea anyway, is that they probably give like the main Twitch broadcasters probably the bulk of their resources, and then kind of the rest of us down here kind of left with leftover and stuff. So I think that does affect the streams, but I could be completely wrong. So sorry, Twitch, if I'm wrong. But Pandabits did mention during the break that you're working. Okay, Series 664 will be right back after a reboot. So good luck. I hope it does help. And Pandavits mentioned working on Mass Effect scripting and stuff like that, and infinite grenades and stuff like that without some insanity. I'm kind of curious about modding Mass Effect. That must be very interesting. I've never really done a lot of modding recently. I guess the last modding I really did was probably back in the day, like literally probably Duke Nukem 3D. What would be after that? Have I modded anything after that? No, I guess since then it's always been more like just game development in general, because I did start to kind of move into learning C and C++ and stuff like that, and trying with that. But one thing that's great about working in games now is that there are a lot of great tools. Like, for example, back when it was Doom and stuff like that, if you weren't modding, you almost had to start from scratch on everything. And it was kind of hard to get a game going, especially like graphics and stuff. It was not easy to get sprites in the game, especially like Commodore 64, which is what's inspiring me for this. It was really hard to get graphics working and everything else. So with the tools you have now, it's definitely a much friendlier start to getting into games. GameMaker, I give it a lot of hassle as I work with it, but it's definitely a great tool. I wish I would have had this back in like high school or even junior high or something like that, rather than staring at empty C++ windows and wondering how I'm going to get a game out of this. But let's get back into it because I did want to finish at 10. So I will see if I can get the control stick working. Not sure how I'm going to get that working. Not that page. Let's see. Axis value. Axis index to check. Yeah, because the thing that's going to make this a little tricky is, well, I'll save that image just in case. The thing that's going to make this a little tricky is because I am giving the game kind of a retro feel. There's only 8 directions the player can move in, which works fine with the keyboard input because they're, at least with the arrow keys, there's basically 4 arrow keys, so you're only going to get 8 combinations out of that anyway. So right now the player and all the enemies can only move in one of 8 directions: up, down, left, right, and the diagonals. With the joystick, the problem is that it can take any one of these directions because it is an analog input. So there's a difference between that and that, for example, which means I'm going to have to probably do a little work to getting what players expect to happen in game with these 8 directions out of the joystick. The closest thing is probably going to be like the enemy aiming, because the enemies work in a very similar fashion. I was panicking my mic might have been off, but thankfully I did turn it on. The enemies work in a similar fashion in that what they do is they try to shoot at the player, but because the enemies have the same restriction as the player, they can only shoot in one of 8 directions. So what I do now is I basically get this angle, if I can draw it properly. This is GameMaker. In GameMaker, this is 0. So I get this angle, and then based on whether it's closer to here, or to here, or to here, I try to figure out which of those directions the enemy's going to shoot to try and get at the player. It's probably going to be a similar process for figuring out, see if I can get the left stick properly, which of these different directions is actually going to map to the 8 directions. It's probably going to be a very similar process. But for now, I think I just want to get the gamepad to actually do something in the game. That'll be the start. Looks like gamepad axis value will return -1 for each of the available axes. So it can measure the horizontal axis and the vertical axis. I'm assuming that -1, at least horizontally, is going to be left. 1 is going to be all the way to the right. And then anything in between there is going to be the middle, with 0 being the exact middle. So let's map that out too. It'll help me think about it as well. So -1 to 1, and then 0 in the middle. And there's probably all these like values in here too, like 67 or whatever. There's probably this range that you get to deal with. And for vertical, I would imagine that minus is going to be up based on the way GameMaker is working so far. And down is 1, but if my character flips, I'll figure that out pretty quickly. So, one direction game plan. This actually looks kind of like what I can use. Because this GP axis, LH is obviously horizontal, LV is obviously vertical. And it's probably device 0, so the same device I've been using so far. And point direction is a GameMaker function that allows you to take 2 points and figure out, a GameMaker direction variable based on that. So this is probably exactly what I need to be doing to start with anyway. And let me catch up to the chat so I don't leave you guys alone too long. I hope Sirius654 got the stream working. But Pandavitz, going back to the Mass Effect, said you can change a lot of values in the AI, stuff like health regen, invincibility during shield regeneration, periods of regeneration, aggression if enemies are left alone, how often they take cover, etc. That's pretty good. A lot that you can set. Probably for the game itself. I guess, a lot of you will probably already understand this, but just in case, for people that are kind of new to game development, in the past there were only programmers. Artists kind of came in later, and then the third group of people that kind of come in at the end were game designers. In Japan they were called planners. But obviously in the beginning you needed programmers because otherwise nothing would get working on the computer, and you still need programmers. There's a thing now where, because you have programmers and game designers and they can both kind of overlap in certain areas, there's kind of a split. There's the stuff the programmers do and the stuff that the game designers do, and usually game designers are about balancing the game, making levels, obviously, things like that. Programmers are usually about handling the system, so if there's physics and stuff like that, they usually do that. Control implementations, things like that. Obviously they work together, but kind of a dividing line is whether you're writing code or whether you're writing script. And if a project's set up properly, you usually can't break the entire game with script. You can break your part with it, usually, if things are compartmentalized properly. You can break your part with it, or you can break your stage with it, but you can't usually break the whole game with it. Programmers, because they have so much power, they can completely break the game if they want to, or even if they don't want to. Usually they don't want to, because they're controlling everything. Which means usually the amount of time it takes to get something working in a program is a lot longer because you want to be a lot more careful. So you have to check it, 1,000 different ways. You have to make sure it works. You couldn't do what I'm doing in GameMaker, which is just flying by the seat of my pants and just seeing what works and testing it and throwing it at the wall and assuming it works and going on with it, stuff like that. That's more of a game designer thing, probably why a lot of us are hated by programmers. But the advantage to doing it that way is obviously it's faster. You can just try things out. If it doesn't work, throw it away. And making a good game is all about iteration. The more times you can get in there, say, I don't like this, I'll change this. I don't like this, I'll change this. The more times you can do that, the better the game gets. You can't do all that in program because every time you do something in program, you really have to make sure that everything's not breaking the game, which is why programmers usually like anything that's going to be game balancing or whatever. They'll try to throw that out into script so that game designers can work with that while they handle the system stuff, and that's usually a dividing line. So for Mass Effect 2, probably the way they did it, obviously, is that the basic system is all handled by programmers, but probably the game designers there are actually doing exactly what PandaBits is doing, which is going into those scripts, modifying variables. This enemy is not quite aggressive enough, so I want to add this. I want to maybe change this level around a little bit. So if you want to become a game designer, modifying is actually a really good way to go about it because it's a pretty similar skill set to what you use in real life. Obviously, if you do know how to program and do game design and scripting and all that, all the much better because it does come in handy. And PandaBits did mention a little bit about degrees and things like that with dead angles. Just looking at this function list, if I can get back to it, there is an axis dead zone command, so I could probably use that to modify that. So GameMaker does provide that, which is good. And right being 0 degrees, yeah, PandaBits, exactly. There's definitely going to be something we can do with that. And there is going to be disgusting math coming up, I'm sure. And Cirrus654 fixed the computer. Welcome back. We're going to get started with getting the player moving on the axis. So I did have my long little lecture about the difference between programmers and game designers, but that was a diversion, so let's get back to work. First thing is going to be basically to get the direction, because with the enemy stuff, if I can get the right one, with the enemy stuff, that's what I was using, converting that direction into one of 8 directions. So let's do that first. Go back into player, go back into that super monster controller support script, which is no longer just controller support. You know what, I'm going to move that to the top, just so I don't have to keep scrolling down every time. So I'm going to assume there's a controller plugged in to port 0 for now. Just get the direction out of that. Call it controller direction. And for now, I just want to show a debug message to make sure that I'm getting that information. And let's see what kind of information is stored in there too. Okay, real simple. I'm going to grab that information and make sure it's doing what I expect it to do. Nothing more than that. So all that debug text should appear down here. Yep. You can't see what I'm doing, but I am moving the left stick around, and the numbers are changing based on that. I'm moving with the keyboard to get out of the way, by the way. One thing that's kind of interesting is that it seems to remember the last spot where the stick is, so that's probably going to be where I need to worry about dead zones, because I'm not moving the stick very much at all, but it's completely changing the direction, which is probably not a good thing. How am I going to go about that? Because I don't want to have the player moving when I don't want the character moving when the player's not actually moving the stick. So I do need a dead zone. guess I do need to worry about that right away. So let's see what this does. Gamepad set axis dead zone. Yeah, unfortunately, it doesn't say what 0.05 actually means physically, but let's find out. Let's find out. That's probably one of those things I'll just have to adjust in the future. Because it says between 0 and 1, so I would assume 1 means that no matter how far you push the stick, it's not going to do anything with it. I probably don't want to do that every time. Let's just do that in system. So in the creation, let's do that. Let's create a constant so I can modify it more easily. Call it axis dead zone. Clever naming. Let's just set it at that 0.05 that they magically have for now. Make sure it's set. Okay. So now I don't have to come into system every time to change that. Let's see if that makes a difference. It still seems to take a direction. Maybe I'll increase that dead zone. Let's go way up with it. Let's go 0.2. I'm sure that's way too big, but let's see what it does. Okay, now I'm getting a lot of zeros. Even at 0.2, a very minimal amount of input is actually causing the numbers to change. So I don't know what world 0.05 actually does anything, but let's go all the way to 0.5 and see what that does. Getting there. Okay. That's starting to feel about right. It's maybe a little too much of a dead zone. Before I go any further, I should probably describe what a dead zone is for some of you guys. When you have your controller stick like this, your maximum movement is probably like this. You can move the stick all the way out here. And what I had was no dead zone, so probably even the teeniest, tiniest little movement of the stick just completely threw it in that direction or whatever. But if you set up a dead zone, what it means is unless the stick goes further than this, radius basically, it doesn't register any input. So that is what that is doing. Let's see, what should I do? One other problem I'm going to see is the default direction is 0, but I don't want the player to be moving in the 0 direction when the stick is at rest. So I need to account for that first, which means I'm going to have to do a little bit more with the stuff in here. Point 1. I may not even need to do the dead zone stuff if I am doing this. I don't know. And I need to know absolute value, don't I? Yeah. So I don't have to worry about pluses and minuses. I'm sure it's just ABS, but yeah, okay. So if the absolute value is greater than 0.01, or same thing for the vertical. So as long as the controller is being moved at least enough that the player obviously wants to move the character, then worry about moving the character. And make sure I get enough parentheses in here so that it logically lines up. Okay. So if there's enough input, set the controller direction to that. If there's not enough input, then I'm going to try setting the controller direction to -1, just to say that the controller's not moving. Let's see how that works. Okay, so you see the message -1 popping up. If I do move it enough, it gives me a direction. So the last thing is going to be translating those minimal angles to one of the 8 directions. That could take some time, so for now what I'm going to do is just get the player moving. I think that's more important first. So even if it violates the rules, I think I'm going to do that first. Step up. So set vertical speed, horizontal speed. And I need to know how to do that. Script in GameMaker Studio language. I think it's just V speed, probably. Yeah, V speed. So the equivalent of set the vertical speed in this UI thing is V speed equals. Let's go in and do that. For now, let's just get this working. Kind of the sloppy way, I guess. Let me make sure I'm doing the same thing here. Space speed. I don't want to start giving the player analog control, so let's do it this way. It's greater than 0. Guess I can do all that in here. I guess at the end of the day I am going to worry about angles. Definitely feel time catching up with me. I hope I can get this done before 10. I think I can run a little over. So I'm going to try just the 4 directions to start with. And then add the other directions in after the diagonals. Let's go less than or equal to 359. Now let's do less than 360. Should be okay. It should figure it out for me because I'm not using equal. So let me just make sure I remember how GameMaker does directions. not game directions, GameMaker directions. Okay. So 0 is facing to the right, 45, 90, 180. So let's just go, if it's somewhere in this quadrant, go right. So horizontal speed equals PL base speed. Otherwise go up. It's going to act really, really weird, but I'm not going to worry about it too much. Minus PL base speed, go left, and finally go down. Alright, let's see what that does. This is in the step. And I'm resetting the speed in begin steps, so it should be okay. Something bad. Okay, well, I guess I better check my semicolons. Probably parentheses, but no, they are semicolons, so that's a good sign. I think I'm just missing a lot of parentheses. Now, I'm definitely missing one out here. Yeah, everything was just kind of misaligned. Okay, there we go. That should fix it. Something's still bad. Line 6. Oh, okay, I'm missing the parentheses at the beginning. If you do start learning C++, I guess you'll become very familiar with parentheses and getting everything proper with that. It'll become nightmare. I'm sure if you're more used to programming, that stuff doesn't come up. Okay, so I should be able to move in one of 4 directions, and I am. So if I push up, I move up. If I push down, I move down. If I push right, even though it's mirrored, I move right. And if I push left, I move left. I'm not accounting for hurt states or anything like that, so the player is able to move even while they're dead, for example. But we got it working. So let's see. Up. Step. So this kind of needs to come at the end. Actually, let's move controller script to the beginning. That's probably the proper way to do this. That should at least, because of the way the logic was timed, that should at least fix the player moving while he's dead problem. Let's find out. Yep, can't move the player while they're hurt or dead anymore, so that fixed that problem. Next thing is to get 8 directions instead of 4. And I'm probably going to want to borrow from the enemy shooting script. Fire direction, something like that. Knockback direction, shoot. Fire shot, maybe. Utility. Draw tags, knockback direction. Okay, well this will work. Knockback direction. So these are all the angles that I need to work with. already in here. And it's even commented, so I can pretty much copy it and delete all this stuff inside, hopefully. Should get me good to go. And script. Okay, I moved it up to the top now. Okay, so that was my basic just test stuff. Let's get rid of that. And move up. I don't need this. So sorry if I'm moving way too fast for you guys at the moment. Just trying to make sure that I do come in under time. But I do want to see this actually working properly before leaving it. Okay. So for moving right, it's just going to be that. Moving left is going to be the opposite of that. So anytime he's moving left, it's going to be this, probably. So there's going to be that minus horizontal speed component if there's left. If there's right movement, it's going to be positive. Glad I had that code. Now let's worry about V speed. If it's up, it should be minus. So anytime there's an up, there should be this minus. Anytime it's down, it should be plus. And that's up, so it's minus. Make sure I don't delete anything I shouldn't be deleting. And I need to change all those directions to controller directions, because that's the name of the variable I'm using. So this is the less glamorous side of making games. Changing variables. I don't want to do a search and replace because things could go horribly wrong. And wherever I lifted that script from, I'm not using knockback anymore, so I guess it's not an issue, but I switched from using other.direction to just direction partway through, so that's not a good sign if I ever decide to bring knockback back. Do need to remember that. Let's get our variables right. Make sure I have controller direction in all of these spots. And just to be on the safe side, I should be okay with not having to set HSpeed to 0, but I'm just going to do it anyway just to be on the safe side. Oops, in that case it's going to be V speed. Same with that one. so that I'm always setting a horizontal and a vertical direction. And one problem this is going to cause is if I'm not using the controller, it could mess up the way the keyboard works, but let's make sure everything here is okay. H speed, V speed, okay. Well, let's hope that works. Let's give it a shot. And while I catch up here, no turning either, which looks a bit funny. Yeah, because all of that's being handled. When you press a key, it checks where the player is moving to decide like the sprite direction, and none of that's being done in the controller yet. So it's always going to be the player facing down and just kind of stiffly moving around. That's going to be another step. And yeah, exactly. Some of that can be done the next day. And drawing 8 directions is super hard when you're doing 2D. Yes, anyone who saw me drawing the original Cowboys knows that I had a lot of trouble getting those diagonal directions to look right. They might still not look right, but that's something I'll have to revisit. Yeah, Panavitz mentions there were some interesting pixels when I was drawing that cowboy a few weeks ago, specifically for the Hertz states. Yeah, check that episode out on YouTube and you'll see exactly how much trouble I have. That is youtube.com, Blue Tengu Studio, all one word. I think the link's down there with YouTube and the Twitch feed, but yeah, that's an interesting episode to catch. And Sirius654 is going to work on the game this weekend, maybe do some inventory. Yeah, if you do stream or if you do want to show anything, definitely let us know. And, you know, I'm doing a lot of stopping and starting and trial and error myself, so definitely not a problem. Such is the nature of game development, as Pandabit says. It's always interesting to watch people do this. Let's see what happens. Okay. Awesome. That actually worked. I'm surprised that worked. It's nice to have a good surprise now and again instead of something bad happened. Feels really awkward on the analog stick. I have to warn you about that. It feels really awkward. The problem is the analog stick moves in 360 directions, but there are these different like hard points where suddenly it shifts to moving in like a diagonal, for example. It is extremely awkward, so I'm going to have to think about how to deal with that. Let's see if I can get this up on the camera so you can see what's going on. I'll try to move it 360 degrees so you can see what's happening. I run into ghosts, I guess. So as you can see, I'm moving the stick around smoothly, if I can get it on camera. Moving the stick around smoothly, but it just kind of switches to those 8 directions. And that's probably not a good way to do it. So I guess if I do have joystick stick support, maybe being able to support all 360 degrees of movement is the way to go. Maybe when it comes to shooting, I can't do that. I'll have to think about it. Maybe I'll play a few twin stick shooters just to see how they're doing it as well. But the principle is working. The controller is doing the same thing that the keyboard is doing, except for, like Pandabits mentioned, the sprite isn't being updated because the player direction isn't being updated, because that's all based on keyboard stuff. But we're in a good place. The keyboard is supported. Just to review, A button is the same as the space bar, which is duck. X is the same as shoot, which is control. I'm going to end up shooting myself and get a game over here. And I can move in one of 8 directions, as awkward as that is. So that is where I am there. I'm going to save this and jump out to the desktop, jump to my task list over at Trello.com. As I mentioned at the beginning of the show, some of you probably weren't here to see it, but I keep my task list public over at Trello.com. If you search for Trello Project Spaghetti, you'll be able to find it. And this has been episode 28. We're in the second half of the year, which means brushing up the game as opposed to making it. Just why I'm doing a lot of these more minute tasks. So controller support is done. And that was episode 28. So I'll move that over here. And think about what needs to be done next episode. So let's move that over here. As the episodes start to pile up, it takes a little longer to get this thing over here. There we go. Okay. I do need to add a few tasks. One is controller, fix awkward stick movement. That wording is probably going to come back to haunt me, but let's just leave it at that. That's probably it. I don't know. There's a lot of adjustment involved in that, so I guess I will leave it at an hour. And that is a game design task. But I can worry about that later. Let's put it up there for now. I'll figure out the order later. One other task I'm going to have to do is, like PandaBits mentioned, update the player sprite based on controller direction. And it's graphical thing, but it is game design logic, so I'll leave it in that. So those are two controller things I still have to do. Let's see, what should I do next week? I could probably continue working on the controller next week. And let's get started with this. Because after moving all of that stuff, at least some of that stuff out of the UI and into scripting, I think I can start moving with this, which is player-defined keyboard bindings and add controller buttons. Some way for the player to decide what they want to actually be the shoot button or what they want to be, the dodge button. So I've already got the startings of that. And if I have time, I will jump back into this stuff. In fact, let's make that the priority, because getting the controller working is higher priority than this stuff. So I'll throw it all in episode 29 for now, but if I don't get to this, I won't get to this. Let's get the controller working next week. I think that's a good place. So I went a little bit over, but thank you guys for watching. Let me check something really quick. Make sure I get all my times so that I can tell you the right times here. Let's see. Series 654, let me just catch up to the chat before I conclude. Nice planner. Mostly just use WordPad. You should see my note, looks like a crazy person. To be honest, I use WordPad a lot. I mean, a lot. Even at other jobs and stuff like that, I've always used WordPad to keep notes and stuff, and it has become kind of a crazy mess. And there's an advantage to it in the fact that it's easy to use, it's easy to open, you can throw stuff in there. You don't have to worry about shifting things around. WordPad, Paintbrush, all those basic tools have their charm. So don't knock it, but Trello is kind of an interesting site. You can kind of organize by tasks. If you are interested in seeing why, kind of the logic of how I have those tasks built up, you should check out episode 1, because I do go over like the Agile process and, well, at least my version of Agile and what I'm using and how I built up that task list. If you are curious about using something like that on your own, that's a good episode to watch. But thank you, PandaBits, and thank you, Cirrus 654, for subscribing, following, checking us out. Appreciate it, and thank you to the rest of you guys in the feed who are watching this show as well. You can catch past episodes and this one, once I put it up, over at youtube.com/Tengu all one word. It's down in the Twitch information. And if you're watching this later on YouTube, you can come drop by the live show we do every week on Twitch TV Blue Tengu. The times are, that's why I brought this up. If you're in the North America, or the Americas, I guess, 3 to 5 Pacific, 4 to 6 Mountain, 5 to 7 Central, 6 to 8 Eastern. So I do this 2 hours a week, and that's Friday for you guys. If you're in the UK, it starts Friday nights at 11 p.m. and runs until 1 a.m. If you're here in Japan with me, it's Saturday morning from 8 to 10. If you're in Australia, the show starts somewhere between 8 to 10, depending on where you live in Australia. It's a big place. And starts 11 a.m. Saturday mornings in New Zealand. So just remember, if you're in the States or the UK, think Friday. If you're anywhere further east, think Saturday. But we always announce what we're doing through Twitter, so follow Tengu to keep track of when the live show starts or episodes go up. I always announce usually about 15 to 20 minutes before the show starts, when it's starting. Or you can follow us on Twitch or YouTube, and all that information should pump out from there as well. And of course, you can see what we're up to anytime at bluetengu.com. Always post episodes and everything there too. So thank you guys for watching. Appreciate your hanging with me. And let's see, buy numpad 6 duck or whatever. Yeah, okay. For next week. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.